If you stand on the rooftop of a luxury apartment tower in Mumbai, you can see to India's in the very same frame. On one side are the billionaire skyscrapers, glass shining, a private helipad on the roof. On the other side is a sea of tin roofs, cramped slums where entire families live in rooms smaller than a garage. The question is not how poor is India, but this: how can it be that in the same country, some people live off stock dividends while others survive on a daily wage? In just a few decades, India has risen to become one of the largest economies in the world, a technological powerhouse that sends spacecraft to the moon, with hundreds of billionaires and a place near the top of the global rich list. But the cold numbers on the other side say something else. The richest 10% hold the bulk of the country's wealth, while the poorest 50% own only a tiny slice. The top 1% alone have seen their wealth soar dramatically over the last few decades. Yet if you flip to another set of figures, the picture seems almost the opposite. Based on income inequality indicators, some reports put India in the group of moderately unequal countries. In some official data, India even appears more equal than several developed nations. And it is estimated that more than 100 million people have escaped extreme poverty in just over a decade. So is India a success story of poverty reduction, or a symbol of terrifying inequality? This piece is not just about saying that India is poor or shouting that the rich exploit the poor. We are going to trace the story back through history, from social hierarchies carved over thousands of years, through the shock of colonial rule, into the whirlwind of globalization and technology. Only then can we see why inequality in India is at once complex and extreme. And more importantly, why the seemingly contradictory sets of numbers can coexist, and what that means for the future of a nation of more than 1 per billion people. Before the British arrived, India was never a flat society. The caste system had existed for thousands of years, dividing people into rungs on a ladder that was almost impossible to climb, from priests and warriors to merchants, craftsmen, and those outside the system entirely, later known as Dalits or untouchables. Caste was not just about honor and status, it was a nail hammered into economic life. The caste you were born into largely determined what jobs you could do, how much you could study, and whether you could own land. In pre-colonial villages, there were already very rich people landlords, merchants, and there were crowds of tenant farmers and artisans living hand to mouth. But inequality then was wrapped inside religious structures and custom. It wasn't measured by GDP or a Gini coefficient. When the British came, they didn't erase this stratification. They learned how to lean on it in order to rule. One of their most powerful tools was the land revenue systems like zamindari, which turned certain intermediary groups into tax lords collecting rent for the colonial state. In many regions, these landlords were granted formal land ownership, while the peasants remained mere cultivators, paying heavy tax on their produce. When the global price of grain or cotton rose, the gains flowed to landlords and exporters. When crops failed, the risk crushed hired laborers and tenant farmers. The colonial system also redrew the map of development. Railways, ports, and industrial zones were built primarily to ship raw materials out and import finished goods from Britain. That created pockets of prosperity in port cities like Bombay, Mumbai, Calcutta, Kolkata, and Madras, Chennai, while the vast interior remained rural, poor, and dependent on the monsoon. When India finally gained independence, it inherited an economy with deep wounds, a society fractured by caste, and a structure skewed toward low-productivity agriculture, weak mass education, and a thin modern industrial base. After 1947, India's leaders chose a soft, socialist planned economy. The state-controlled key sectors imposed a dense web of licenses and quotas, and used strong trade protection, hoping to leap from colonial poverty to a self-reliant, industrialized economy. At the same time, the state tried to correct historical injustices, land reforms in some states, and a reservation system to give disadvantaged groups guaranteed seats in education and public sector jobs. But reality was messy. Land reform was delayed or dodged in many places. Landlords split land among relatives to skirt legal ceilings. The license permit quota raj and heavy protectionism helped create a class of crony capitalists, business families with good political connections who enjoyed preferential access to licenses, capital, and markets. Meanwhile, small firms, farmers, and workers were stuck in an economy growing painfully slowly, what came to be called the Hindu rate of growth of around 3 to 4% per year for decades. By the early 1990s, India's economy had run into a balance of payments crisis. Foreign reserves were nearly depleted. What came next was a turning point. India had to liberalize, open up to trade, relax controls, and encourage private and foreign investment. From a closed economy, India plunged into globalization and the growth spurt began. The service sector, especially information technology, software, and business process outsourcing, exploded. Bangalore, Hyderabad, and Pune turned into new Silicon Valleys. GDP growth rose to 7 to 8% a year over long stretches. Hundreds of millions of people climbed out of extreme poverty. This became one of the fastest poverty reduction stories in modern history. But the other side of the coin was widening inequality. Many studies of wealth show that since the early 2000s, most of the new wealth created has flowed into the pockets of the very rich. Some years, over 70% of new wealth went to the top 1%, while the poorest half of the population received only a tiny fraction. The number of Indian billionaires surged, with individuals worth tens or even hundreds of billions of dollars. The gap between a gleaming megacity of glass towers and a village surviving on the monsoon has become ever more jarring. So why do we feel that inequality is horrific even though some official indicators suggest India is not that unequal? The first reason is that we are talking about different kinds of inequality. One is income inequality, measured through household consumption surveys numbers that can understate gaps because the rich rarely report their full spending and the poor benefit from subsidies. The other is inequality of wealth and opportunity, more clearly reflected in who owns land, stocks, real estate, and who gets quality education, healthcare, and good jobs. If we focus on wealth and opportunity, the gap in India is indeed deep and wide. The second factor is that the ghost of caste never really died. Even though the Indian constitution bans discrimination by caste, social reality tells another story. Dalits and many tribal communities still make up a large share of the poor, those without land, and those stuck in the hardest, lowest paid jobs with the least access to quality schooling. When a fast-growing economy rewards those with capital, skills, and networks, these historically shackled communities are almost left off the starting line. The third factor is geography as destiny. After liberalization, coastal states with better infrastructure and stronger trading traditions, places like Maharashtra, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, and Delhi surged ahead. Inland states such as Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Jharkhand, and Odisha struggled with much lower average incomes and human development indices. Within one country, the gap between a tech metropolis and a rain-dependent village can feel like looking at two different centuries. In the countryside, most people still rely on small-scale farming. Land has been divided among generations, leaving tiny plots, low productivity, and heavy dependence on the monsoon and market prices. A single drought or price crash can wipe out a year's income. The safety net insurance, subsidies, welfare has improved, but it is still patchy and thin. Many farmers turn to informal moneylenders charging high interest. When crops fail, they fall into a spiral of debt. When the village can no longer feed its people, they head for the city. But most do not walk straight into air-conditioned offices. They drop into the informal economy. A huge share of India's workforce labors without formal contracts or social security. Street vendors, drivers, construction workers, helpers in unregistered workshops. Government figures themselves acknowledge that most new jobs are being created in this informal, low-paid, weakly protected segment. In that setting, a young person finishing basic schooling in a village and moving to the city often faces only two realistic options: physical labor with unstable income or a string of low-end service jobs. At the same time, another young person born into an urban middle-class family, educated in private schools and fluent in English, can step into technology, finance, or startups and earn a salary in the top 5%. To people, one India, but they live into separate economic universes. The divide is not just between rural and urban, it runs inside the cities themselves. Luxury high-rises, gleaming malls, and tech parks rise almost against the walls of unregistered slums, where residents have no secure land rights, no reliable piped water, and poor access to healthcare. Property and rent prices in good neighborhoods have risen far faster than ordinary wages, making homeownership a distant dream for most. Another layer of inequality forms where gender and caste intersect. Indian women, especially those from lower castes and marginalized communities, are often squeezed between family expectations, cultural limits, and economic barriers. A large share of women work in the informal sector in low-paid, insecure jobs. When a poor family has to choose who studies further, sons are still more likely to be prioritized. The result is persistent gender gaps in higher education, income, and asset ownership. On top of social and historical factors, state policy design also helps lock in inequality. India relies heavily on indirect taxes like GST, which fall on both rich and poor as they consume goods and services, while taxes on wealth, property, inheritance, and financial assets remain relatively weak. That means the tax burden, proportionally, leans more on ordinary consumers than on those sitting on large piles of wealth. Another issue is how public money is spent. Welfare programs, rural employment guarantees, food subsidies, public health schemes have saved millions from hunger and destitution, but they often face problems: complex procedures, corruption, leakages, and uneven distribution across states. Meanwhile, tax breaks, bailouts, and cheap credit for large corporations can be surprisingly generous compared to budgets for public schools or primary health centers. Globalization and the service boom have sliced the map in yet another way. Services account for a huge share of GDP, and the best jobs in this sector demand high skills, English proficiency, and degrees. Those who clear that skills threshold can leap into high incomes. Those who don't circle through precarious work, competing against millions just like themselves. The same growth wave lifts only the boats with engines, while the rest are left bobbing in the wake. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed this divide in the starkest way. When lockdowns hit, tens of millions of migrant workers walked hundreds of kilometers back to their villages after losing jobs, rooms, and any savings. At the same time, the net worth of Indian billionaires surged during the crisis. A health emergency became a snapshot of how fragile most lives are, and how far apart India on Zoom and India on the street really are. Still, we should be careful. High inequality does not mean everything has gotten worse. Over the past 3 decades, hundreds of millions have escaped hunger. Life expectancy has risen, more children are in school, and even many of the poor, in terms of basic consumption, live better than their parents' generation. The controversy over India's inequality numbers actually reveals something crucial. We are looking at the same society through very different lenses. The first lens often used by governments and financial institutions is income and average consumption. Through this lens, the incomes of the poor have risen, welfare and subsidies have lifted many out of extreme poverty, and the gap measured by day-to-day spending is not seen as insane as we might imagine. The second lens favored by inequality researchers focuses on wealth and power. Who owns land, homes, shares, companies, patents, who shapes the rules. Through this lens, India looks like a country where a few percent of the population sit on a mountain of wealth, while the majority own very little and are highly exposed to shocks. The ultimate question, therefore, is not just why is India so unequal, but what kind of society does India want to become? One scenario is that the country keeps growing fast, produces more billionaires, and builds more skyscrapers, while the countryside empties out. Cities swell with rings of slums, and wealth inequality gets thicker and harder to cut through. The other scenario, more difficult, politically contentious, and painful, would be to use tax policy, education, healthcare, housing, and labor law to raise the floor of opportunity, so that the child of a Dalit farmer in Bihar has a real chance of entering an engineering college and becoming an engineer, not just in one or two fairy tale cases. Today's India is a giant experiment in development. Can a nation reduce poverty quickly without falling into a trap where inequality tears its social fabric apart? GDP numbers, income charts, and rich lists are just the surface. Below that is a question of human dignity. How to make sure people don't have to choose between paying for their children's schooling and buying medicine for their parents. How to ensure that success is not just a lifetime reward for those born in the right place, the right caste, the right family. When you return to that first rooftop image, towers of glass on one side, tin roofs on the other, you might think it is a uniquely Indian story. But in reality, it is a magnifying mirror for the whole world as we enter an era of ballooning wealth inequality. The difference is that in India, everything is more naked, with almost no makeup. And the way this country solves or fails to solve the problem of its wealth gap will not only decide the future of 1.4 billion people, but also send a very clear message to the rest of the planet about the true cost of a growth race without justice.